Jon Meyers here, and in this video I wanted to take you through a super exciting feature that's just been marked stable as of Next.js 12.2. And that feature is on-demand ISR, or on-demand incremental static regeneration. Now what this gives us is a way to programmatically tell Next.js that we would like to revalidate a particular path. So basically we're saying our data has changed in the backend. The data that's on our static page that's been generated is no longer fresh. This has become stale. And so we would like to revalidate it. So in the background, Next.js is going to call getStaticProps again. It's going to pre-render or render a version of your page and then cache that for anyone who visits that path in the future. Now that's super cool just on its own, but when you pair that with something like Supabase function hooks, which allow us to subscribe to events that happen in the database, like insert, update, or delete, and then call an endpoint that's hosted somewhere on the internet. So in our case, we could listen to any new records that are inserted or updated or deleted in our Supabase database, and then we could call an API route in Next.js, which is responsible for revalidating particular pages. So this gives us all the benefits of having a fully static site without having to kind of pay with having stale data for a particular amount of time. So let's see how it's done. Let's create our next application by typing npx create next app, which is going to be the package that we're going to be using, and then the name of our application. In this case, I'm calling it on-demand ISR. And so once this is finished, we want to change into that directory and open it up in VS Code. And we just want to make sure that we're using the latest version of Next.js. And so if we head over to package.json, just make sure that Next is set to 12.2.0 or higher. Now let's head over to Supabase and create a new project. So we're going to go to app.supabase.io. So you'll also need to authenticate with GitHub if this is your first time using Supabase. But once you're at this dashboard, we just want to click New Project. I'm going to create this in my examples organization. We want to give our project a name. So mine's going to be On-Demand ISR. I think that's what I called the other one. And also a strong password. And make sure you select a region that's close to you. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so I'm going to choose Oceania and then create my new project. Now this is going to take a little bit of time to set up our project. And so in the meantime, we can go and create our Supabase client in our Next.js app. So if we come across to our Next.js app here and create a new file called .env.local. And now there are two environment variables that we're going to need here. We're going to want next_public_Supabase_URL. And then we're also going to need an anon_key. And we can get these two values from our Supabase dashboard even while our project is building. They're conveniently here on the landing page. So I can grab my anon key from here and paste that in over here. And then also grab my URL from the project configuration. And we're going to paste that in here. Now we can create our utils folder and then also our file called supabase.js. And we're going to be using the Supabase.js library to create our client. So let's install that from npm. So we can do npm I @supabase/supabase-js. Now I've been getting this weird error in the new version of Next.js. I think this is because I have pnpm installed, and so it's choosing to use that for my log file. And so the way that we can fix this, if you're also getting that issue, is just delete the node modules folder, and then also delete the pnpm-lock.yaml file. And now if we go back to our terminal and run npm I or npm install, and then once that's finished, we can install our @supabase/supabase.js library again. Cool, and that looks like it's worked properly. So now I'm just going to run our development server by saying npm run dev. And now if we come back to our Supabase.js file, we just want to import create client from @supabase/supabase-js. We then want to export default a call to create client. And this takes in a Supabase URL and a Supabase key. And so this is going to be our process.env.next_public_Supabase_URL, and then also our anon key. Our Supabase project should be up and running now, so let's go and create some data. So if I come across to the table editor here, I can create a new table. This one is going to be called posts. So this is just going to store a collection of blog posts. And if we come down to our columns here, I'm going to change this to be a UUID, just because I think it looks a little bit more professional and we'll be using it in our URLs. And then if I click these three dots here, I can call this UUID generate v4 function anytime we create a new post. So this is just going to generate an ID for us. My created at is going to automatically set to whenever I create a new record. And so I'm just going to click this little cog and turn off is nullable, because that should never be null. And then we're going to add a column for our title, which is going to be of type text. And again, we want to click this cog and make sure it is not nullable, because we don't ever want to have a blog post without a title. And then we also want to add a column for the actual content of our article. And so this will also be text and will also be not nullable. Now we can click Save to create our table. And so now we can insert a new row to create a new blog post. So let's say this is our first post and it has really good content. And we click Save to create that post. And then we go and write another article, which is going to be our second post, and not such good content, or grammar or English or whatever. And let's click Save. So we now have these two articles, and so let's display these in our Next.js application. So if we head back over here and go to our landing page, so /pages/index.js, we can get rid of all of this. Actually, we can even get rid of the wrapping div, because all we're going to do is pass in a collection of posts from getStaticProps, and then we just want to call json.stringify and print out our posts, and then null and 2, just so that we're pretty printing whatever we get back as posts. So then if we want to actually get some posts, we need to export a const function called getStaticProps. GitHub Copilot is trying to help me. And then inside here, we want to return an object with the key props, and that is going to be set to our object of posts, which for now we're just going to set to an empty array. And so we can also just get rid of these unused imports at the top. And now if we navigate over to localhost over port 3000, we should see that empty array being displayed in the browser. So let's go and actually get those posts from Supabase. And so let's start by importing our Supabase client from that utils file that we just created. We can then load our posts from Supabase by saying const, look at that, GitHub Copilot has almost got it. So we're getting all of our posts. This isn't quite right because we get back data, but we want to rename that posts. And this is awaiting a call supabase.fromPost, so that's the name of our table. And then we're saying we want to select all of the columns. We don't actually need this .all on the end. But here we can specify which columns we actually want to get back. So star will get all of them back. But since this is our landing page, we really just want an ID for each of our posts and probably the title. So we can say we just want to get back the columns ID and title. And now rather than sending back this static array, we can just send back our array of posts. And now if we refresh our application, we should see we are printing out our two posts. And so now we want to be able to navigate to one of these posts and be able to see more details about it and see the actual content in each of our posts. We could make this navigation a little bit easier for ourselves by rather than just dumping out this big JSON stringify pretty printed version of our posts, we could return us mapping over each post. And then for each of those, we want to return a paragraph tag, and that will need to have a key set to our post.id. And then inside here, we want a link from Next.js. And then inside our link, we need an A tag, which is going to have our post.title. And then our link is going to go, it's going to navigate to / and then whatever our post.id is. So now if I save this, I can get rid of this unused return statement here. And now when we go back, we should see first post and second post. And if we highlight over that in the bottom left, you can see where we're going to navigate to localhost over port 3000 / the ID of our second post or the ID of our first post. So if I click one of these, I'm going to get a 404 because this page doesn't exist. So let's create a dynamic route that's going to display the details for each of our posts. So if we come back here and create a new file under pages, and this is going to use the square bracket syntax here to say this is a dynamic route. So square bracket id.js. And then just to speed this process up a little bit, because it's not really the point of this video, I'm just going to paste in what we're eventually going to build out here. So our blog details component is just going to show, similarly to our last example, just a pre-tag with our dumped out post in it. And we're going to pretty print it with json.stringify. We're then exporting out a getStaticPaths function. So this is what we use with dynamic routes in Next.js to be able to provide a finite collection of possible paths, so Next.js knows how to go and create all of those statically. And so what we want to create is just basically a page for every single post. So we're going and selecting from the post table just the IDs, because we just care about the ID to construct our paths. And then our paths are just mapping over each of those posts, pulling out the ID, and yeah, creating this structure where we've got params and then the ID for each one of our posts. We're then returning those paths from this function, and then we're also setting fallback to false. So basically, if someone tries to navigate to a blog post that doesn't exist, they give us an ID that doesn't exist, they will see the 404 page. We then have our getStaticProps function, and so here we are pulling out that params.id. So basically, this object that we constructed here is what gets passed to getStaticProps. So we pull out the ID for the current blog post that we're trying to fetch data for. We then make a call to Supabase from the post table, select all of the columns where the ID matches the ID that we've been passed in as a parameter. And then because we're expecting this to just be one single post, we can chain on .single so that we, rather than getting back an array with one value in it, we just get back the JSON object itself. And so that's just our singular post. We then return this post as the props coming back from getStaticProps, which is what gets passed into our component up here, and then what we're rendering out in our pre-tag. And so now if I save this and head over to our 404 that we were getting before, we can see that we now get back all of the columns for that particular row or for that article in our Supabase database. And if we were to go back and navigate to our second post, we would see the content for that one. And so this is awesome. All of these pages have been generated statically, and they're super, super fast. If I come back to this page, every time I refresh, it's almost instantaneous. And if I click through to the first post, it doesn't need to make a request to Supabase to get this data, because all of that has happened at build time. This poses a problem, however, if we're looking at this index page where we have first post and second post. If I was to create a third post here and click save, if I refresh my application, we will see that post appear and we can click through to that post because we're running in development mode. But if I simulate building our application for production, so if I come back to terminal here and I say npm run build, and we can see that that's picked up that this is a statically generated website. So it's automatically generated the static HTML and JSON using getStaticProps. So that looks good. So now we want to simulate actually hosting our application by saying npm run start. And now if we go back to our application running in the browser and refresh, we still see our third post. And if we refresh on this page, we see that list. However, now if we come across to Supabase and create a fourth post, no matter how many times we refresh our application here, we're never going to see that fourth post because this is never being told to fetch that data again, because this getStaticProps function only ever runs once on the server when it's building a new version of our Next.js app. Now, Next.js realized a while ago that this was quite limiting, and so they've created a revalidate prop. So if I do this on our index.js, if I say revalidate and then give it a number of seconds, so in this case, let's say 60 seconds. So what's going to happen here is when we deploy a new version of our application, Next.js is going to call this getStaticProps function during the build. And that's going to go off and it's going to fetch all of the posts that exist at the point when we're doing that build from Supabase, and it's going to create this static page with a list of all of our posts that we can view on the landing page. And each time the user refreshes, they're going to get that static version of this page as they did before. But once we reach this timeout period, so this 60 seconds, the next person who requests the page will still get the stale version, but in the background, it's going to kick off a rebuild of this page, and it's going to call get static props again. It's going to go and get that fresh content from Supabase, and it's going to create a new static page for us. And then once that process has finished, the next person who refreshes the application or visits that page will get that newly generated page. And so we can see that in action if we simulate another build of our application. So we say npm run build. So this is simulating us, for example, pushing new changes to GitHub, and then that triggering Vercel to go and deploy our application again, which is something we'll look at soon. And then once that's finished, we run npm run start. So now if we come back to our application and refresh, we'll see that fourth post because that was there at the point that we rebuilt our application. But now if we come in and we create our fifth post, and then we come back to our application and refresh, remember we're still going to get that old stale content. So we're still going to get that static page, but in the background, this has kicked off a new build of just this specific page. And once that's finished, if we refresh again, we'll see that our fifth post has appeared. And this is awesome. This is a really great compromise between the performance benefits that we get of having everything entirely static and generating that just when we rebuild our application, and then the benefits that we get by having actual fresh content where every time the user refreshes the page, we go and fetch that from the server. And so we could do that in Next.js by using something like get server-side props, but then every single user who visits our page is going to have to wait for the request to Vercel to pull down our Next.js app, but then also a request to Supabase to get all of our posts. So wouldn't it be great if we could get all of the performance benefits of having all of our entirely static content, but then somehow know that data in our database has changed and it's time to rebuild a new version of that page? Well, we can do exactly that now with on-demand incremental static regeneration. And so let's start by creating a new API route that's going to be responsible for rebuilding a specific page. So in API, we could actually just rename this hello function here to be revalidate. And then we can also get rid of this comment at the top here. And we just need to make this function async, or if we would prefer to keep this consistent with how we've declared the rest of our application, we can say const handler equals this arrow function. And then at the bottom, we want to export default our handler. Now, revalidating a page on demand is as easy as just saying res.revalidate and then giving it a particular path that we want to revalidate. And so in this case, if any of the data changes in our Supabase backend, we want to rebuild our landing page because that shows a list of all of our articles. We can then await this, so we know when it's finished, and then we could return a res.send, and we could send back a JSON object that just says revalidated true. And after all of that, we did actually forget to put in the async keyword here. Cool, so now we can test this out by doing another build and running our built application. So we can actually just say npm run build and then npm run start. Now we can just do that in one command. And now if we come back to our page and refresh, we'll see all of our posts there. And if we create a new sixth post, a really cool one, and click save. And now if we go back to our application and refresh, we're still going to see it because of our revalidate prop. And so, yeah, let's actually remove that so that we can see exactly what this is doing. So if we remove revalidate from here, and then we do another build and another run, we can now see if we refresh our application and add yet another blog post, this one doesn't need to be actual text anymore. And then if we come across here and refresh, again, we're going to be back in the position where no matter how many times we refresh, we are never going to get that new blog post. The only way that we can get this new blog post now is if we navigate to /API/revalidate. That's going to tell us that we've successfully revalidated here. And now if we go back to our landing page, we're going to see our new blog post there. But now if we try to actually navigate through to the details of that blog post, we're going to see this 404 page. And if we keep refreshing, we're just always going to see this 404 page. And that's because if we have a look in our id.js file, this getStaticPaths function is what told Next.js during build time all of the possible combinations of paths that it needed to build a static file for. And by setting fallback to false, anything that's not in this array of paths here is just going to get the 404 page. So we can fix this by setting fallback to the string blocking. And now this is going to attempt to server render anything that's not in this array of paths. And then if it can't render it, then we'll still get that 404. But if it can, then it will render that page to the user and then cache that as our new static version of that page. And so this will now work for pages that we've newly created. But the user could still put nonsense in here. Like rather than giving us a valid URL, they could just give us something that definitely doesn't exist. And so we still need to handle that 404 case here in getStaticProps. So here we're trying to get a post from Supabase based on that ID that they pass through. So that's this ID here. So if that was nonsense, then our post would be set to undefined. And so here we could say, well, if we don't have a post, then we want to return not found set to true. And this is automatically going to give us that 404 page that we saw earlier. So now if we rebuild our application and we come over to the browser and refresh this page, this is still going to give us nonsense. But if we go back here, we can see all of our posts here. If we click into this, we'll now see the content for that, but that doesn't actually prove our point because this existed at the point that we just did that build. And so now we need to create a new row here, and we'll call this a new one. And this is the new one. And we'll create that article. And now if we come back here and refresh, again, we're not going to ever see that content because we haven't actively told it to go and rebuild this page. So we can do that by going to /API/revalidate. And now if we go back to the landing page, we'll see that new one. And now if we click through to it, we'll see the content. Now this did render quite quickly, but it actually was waiting for the user to navigate to this page and then go and make a request to Supabase and render that page on the server and then send it back. And so we don't want our users sitting around waiting for anything, especially when we have this revalidate API route, which is already being called anytime data changes. And so we can also revalidate the data that's on that page. So when we set up a function hook to do this automatically on Supabase's side, we will get in the request.body, we will get a JSON object that basically has the entire row or record that has been either inserted, updated, or deleted from our Supabase database. And so request.body.record will be our full row if we are inserting or updating. But if we're deleting, there is no record anymore. And so this is set to old record. So if this is inserting or deleting, then we want to access the record's ID in order to tell Next.js which path we want to revalidate. Otherwise, we want to go to old_record ID. So let's create a new variable for our path to revalidate. And this is going to be set to a string with a slash. And then we want the ID of our record. So here we can say we want to interpolate in either the request.body, and then we don't know whether we have record or old record. So we can use optional chaining here to say ?.record, ?.id. So this will be the case on an insert or update. Otherwise, we want to set it to the request.body and then optional old record and optional ID. We can then call again, await res.revalidate and pass it that path to revalidate. So now to set up Supabase to automatically call this endpoint anytime data in our database changes, we first need to actually deploy this somewhere so that we have a live URL for our Supabase instance to send a request to. So we're going to deploy this to Vercel, but first we need to actually create a GitHub repo for it. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to say GitHub repo create, and I'm going to create a new repo for on demand ISR. You can just do this through the GitHub UI or whatever way you prefer to create repos. And I also misspelt that with on-demand ISR, but that's fine. And so I now have this repo, dijonmasters/on-demand ISR. So now if I say git remote-v, I can see that this hasn't added the remote for me. So I can add a remote. If I spell git right remote, add origin, and then I can just update the end of this to be on-demand ISR and intentionally misspell it. Now I can say git push origin main. And now if I head over to vercel.com, I've obviously signed in and created an account. And so here I can say new project, and I've already told it to import these from my Git repository. So I can see on-demand ISR has just now been pushed up to GitHub. So I'm going to import that. And then we need to remember to add our environment variables. And so there was one for, if we open up our .env.local, we can copy across next_public_supabase_URL. And the value of that is going to be this one. And then if we come back over here, our next Supabase anon key is going to be set to this value here. And let's click add. And now that we have our two environment variables, it's picked up that this is a Next.js app. And so all we need to do is click deploy. Yay! And once we get our confetti showing that this has all been deployed, we can go to our dashboard and grab our URL here. So mine is ondemandisr.vercel.app. And if we copy that URL and come across to Supabase, this is where the real magic is, where we can create a function hook. And so if we come across to database and then function hooks and click enable hooks, we can then create a function hook. So the name of this is going to be on post change, but this can be anything you want. This is just a name. The table that we want to subscribe to changes on is the posts table. The events that we want to subscribe to are insert, update, and delete. We want this to send a HTTP request. We want to use the method of post, and we want to send it to that Vercel URL that should still be in your clipboard /API/revalidate. And then the rest of this is all good, so we can say confirm. And now if we come across here to our live app, I'll just move this next to my Supabase instance, and we can see that these are all of the posts that I had when I rebuilt this site. But now if we go to Supabase and we come across to our table editor and come to posts and create a new post, and we'll call this one our live post. Really cool. And click save. And now when we go to our Vercel app and refresh, we should see our live post there. And when we click into that, we see the content for it. Again, this has all happened automatically in the background. As soon as we created that new row in our Supabase instance, that's gone off and made a request to Vercel saying, hey, you need to revalidate this page. It's revalidated our landing page and also the specific content page for this blog. And so now we can test all of our other actions work. So if we come back here and test our update is working by saying really, really cool, and then clicking off, this is going to say all changes saved, which means that has now been written to the database. So now if I come here and refresh, we see really, really cool. And so now we want to test that our delete works and gives us our 404 page. So if I come here and delete this row and wait till it says all changes saved, and then come across to our Vercel application and refresh, we see our 404 page, which is good. And now if we go to our landing page, we should no longer see our live article. Awesome. And that's how easy it is to use Supabase function hooks and Next.js's on-demand incremental static regeneration to ensure that we can have an entirely static site without having to pay with stale data. Thanks for watching.